Well, thank you, all of you, for being here today for our first forum in a series on Sabbath. And if you haven't yet picked up a copy of our book by Heschel on the Sabbath, it's available here at the back. Take it if you don't have any money. If you want to make a donation, you can do that. But read along with us each week, and there's a bookmark that accompanies it that will tell you which chapters we're covering as we come into each of these forum series. Today, we're really delighted to have back with us, second Sunday in a row, the Reverend Dr. Dan Handschy, who has pivoted from food and faith towards incarnation today. And since Craig is out, I am both training acolytes and praying with you all, and then I'm dashing. So watch me fly with my cape. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. O God, who wonderfully created and yet more wonderfully restored the dignity of human nature, grant that we may share the divine life of him who humbled himself to share our humanity, your Son, Jesus Christ, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Well,
Have a great forum. Thank you.
A better prayer than that. Thank you. So the Faith Forum Commission decided that this being the first Sunday of Advent, we would talk about incarnation. I will tie it just kind of tangentially to the Sabbath book. But the doctrine of the incarnation is not well understood among Christians. I mean, we talk about Jesus being incarnate. In the 19th century, particularly in Germany, liberal theologians sort of said, oh, we don't need all of that Greek philosophy infecting Christianity. We need to go back to, simple Jesus. And that's when all of those Life of Jesus books were written, without kind of this insistence on the doctrine of incarnation. And so modern Christians are like, Jesus was a great guy, but was he really God incarnate? And the answer that we will give is yes. What Heschel is doing in the book Sabbath, he talks about how God has made time where holiness is located, right? Not in a building, not in a place, but in time. The Sabbath is what's holy. What the early Christians understood was that, and so imagine in the year 70, the temple has been destroyed, which was where Jewish culture and religion had been located. And so now the question is, where do we find the holy? The rabbis said, well, in the Sabbath and in the Torah. The Christians said, in the person of Jesus and in the community that continues in his name. And so while Heschel locates the holy in time, Christians are going to locate the holy in persons. And they're going to give that word, person, a new understanding, which most of our Western way of thinking is based on, is that understanding of person. So open your prayer book, if you've got one, to page 864. So it took a few hundred years for Christians to come to a definition of what they meant by the incarnation. And the Council of Chalcedon or Chalcedon in the year 451 made this definition. And I'll read it, and you can understand why people in the 19th century thought there's just too much Greek philosophy involved in this, right? Therefore, following the Holy Fathers, we all with one accord teach men to acknowledge one and the same Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, at once complete in Godhead and complete in manhood, truly God and truly man, consisting also of a reasonable soul and body of one substance, homoousios, with the Father as regards his Godhead, and at the same time one substance with us as regards his manhood, humanity. Let's put that way. Like us in all respects apart from sin, as regards his Godhead begotten of the Father before all ages, and yet as regards his humanity begotten for us men and for our salvation of Mary the Virgin, the God-bearer, one and the same Christ, Son, Lord, only begotten, recognized in two natures, without confusion, without change, without division, without separation, the distinction of natures being in no way annulled by the union, but rather the characteristics of each nature being preserved and coming together to form one person and one subsistence. That word subsistence in Greek would be hypostasis, not as parted or separated into two persons, but one and the same Son and only begotten God, the Word, Lord Jesus Christ, even as the prophets from earliest times spoke of him, and our Lord Jesus Christ himself taught us, and the creed of the fathers handed down to us. Oof, that's a mouthful. That definition was worked out in the midst of bitter controversy. Beginning really in the 3rd century, so the 200s, Christians were trying to understand their experience of God's activity in Jesus. They knew Jesus to be present at the Eucharist. How was that possible? What was going on? And there were two trends that the church would later call heretical, that tried to work this out. One was what we might call the Gnostic trend, and that is that Jesus wasn't really human. He was a divine revealer, appeared in human form, taught us what was necessary to escape this world of corruption and death. So as you read a lot of that early Christian stuff, there's this language about, making the heavenward ascension, escaping matter. The Greeks thought that matter was, that's not where reality was. Reality was way up there in the realm of the ideas, which had nothing to do with the realm of matter, except by some sort of derivation. Christians said, no, if that were true, then God can't save us as humans. It's only as we escape this world of matter that we're saved. So no, we're not going to go that way. The second trend was what would later be called Arianism, after Arius, the person who promulgated it, that Jesus was not quite fully divine. Was, maybe a divine figure, but not fully God, and therefore sort of taught us the way to live in this world, but couldn't really save us from this world, right? So we have the Gnostics and the Arians. Big fight. The emperors in the East, in Constantinople, tended to be Arian. Good political reasons for that. And so Christians had to sort of fight the empire to overcome that. And so the early Christians came up with a dictum that they used to measure anybody's theology. And that dictum was, God became human in order that humanity might become God. And if your theology didn't take you there, then there's something wrong. So Gnosticism, God became human. Nope, Gnosticism doesn't go there. Arianism, that humans might become God. Nope, Arianism doesn't take that second part. So those two parts are sort of the guarantee that your theology is correct. So they had to work out the implications of that. And in the 4th century, a bishop named Athanasius of Alexandria did most of the work to begin that. So he wrote 2 treatises that are famous, Against the Arians and On the Incarnation. And what he said in On the Incarnation was that, so the Greeks, let me back up a minute. The Greeks believed that this world of matter had always existed. It was kind of messy, it was formless. And then the demiurge, not God, God is too far distant from this to have anything to do with this. The demiurge creates what we see around us, sort of sets it in motion, steps back, lets it wind down. It'll eventually sort of peter out, It'll dissolve into flame and be recreated and go through it all again. But this world of matter is not really what's important. It's the world of ideas, the world of the divine. Athanasius starts from a different point. He says, no, God created the world from nothing. Right? Even you read the first chapter of Genesis, and the Spirit of God moves over the void. There's something there. And Athanasius says, no, there was a time when there was no time. There was a time when there was no matter. God creates from nothing. And the way God creates is in an act of divine love. That God desires to love and so creates. And that reality is in fact this divine self-loving, self-gift of love. So within the Trinity, and here Athanasius starts to work out the concept of the Trinity, the relationship between the persons of the Trinity is loving self-gift. So that God begets the Son. What Arius would have said was that God created the Son and created the Son in time. There was a time when the Son was not. Athanasius, on the other hand, says the Son, the second person of the Trinity, is eternally begotten. And that God, the Father, gives the self in love in the begetting of the Son. The Spirit, God, the Father, proceeds the Spirit eternally. And so the relationship, what distinguishes the persons of the Trinity, is that relationship of self-gifting love. God begets the Son, the Spirit proceeds from the Father. Those are loving self-gift. The Son and the Spirit return that love in worship and thanks. So that the relationship, the reality of God is loving self-gift. So that's Athanasius's big insight, is that the nature of reality is loving self-gift. Humanity, according to Athanasius, is created to return that gift to God. That in our worship of the Creator, in our understanding of creation as a gift, we return the gift to God. That is what keeps reality in existence. So get your head around that. It's our self-gift of reality back to God in worship and praise that keeps reality in existence. When we sinned, what we did, according to Athanasius, was turn from the worship of the Creator and understanding creation as a gift to understand creation as our due, that we could use it however we wanted. That was human sin. What happens then, according to Athanasius, is that the world begins to dissolve back into nothingness because we've interrupted the flow of divine self-gift that is, in fact, reality. God is unwilling to have God's creation dissolve again into nothingness. And so begins to teach the Jews the understanding of sacrifice, right? The return of things to God as gift. We as humans fail to get it. And so God says, then the Son must become incarnate. The Son enters into the created order and combines the two natures, created and uncreated, in the Incarnation. Right? What we just read in the prayer book, the two natures unconfused, unmixed, but nevertheless the same in one hypostasis, in one person. That prevents the dissolution of reality back into nothingness. But the Son, the second person of the Trinity, must continue that self-gift to God, right? Which within the persons of the Trinity is the nature of God, is that divine self-gift. under the aspect of human sin, that self-gift looks like sacrifice. So what Athanasius would say in answer to the question, why does Jesus die on the cross? Because given human sin, that's what self-gift looks like. Right? So there's no paying off of humans' debt of sin. There's no, it's just that's the nature of what has happened to reality is that self-gift, that complete and utter self-abandonment to God looks like death on the cross. That humans have done that to what is the nature of God. So thinking of that then as self-gift, right? The incarnation keeps that from dissolving, keeps reality from dissolving. Here's where Christian thought begins to differ radically from Greek thought. First of all, the idea of creation from nothing, creatio ex nihilo. The Greeks didn't think that. Then, if Jesus as a person is both divine and human, then person begins to mean something different than it does for Greek thought. In Greek thought, the word for person is prosopa, which means face or mask. So think of Greek tragedy, right? They're wearing the mask. What Greek tragedy says is that persons are governed by fate. Right? Think of Oedipus, right? The prediction that he's going to marry his mother. So his father sends him off to live with shepherds and do what you want. You can't overcome fate. It's going to happen. That's the Greek understanding of person. And so the Stoic, says life is suffering, so just accommodate yourself to it, right? Learn to go with the flow. Learn to be impassible, not suffering. Christians are saying, no, what defines a person is that freedom, that self-gift of love. This is a radically, radically different understanding of person than was true in Greek thought. God became human in order that humanity might become God. We're beginning to enter the divine line. So that what the vocation of humanity was, in Athanasius's understanding, was to offer the creation back to the Creator in thanksgiving. That's what keeps reality in existence. So for Athanasius, it was our Eucharist, right, which is the ongoing offering of the Son back to the Father, and the Son now having created nature as well, offering that back to God, that keeps the world in existence. You didn't know that's what you were doing on Sunday, did you? Think about it, though, right? I do this sometimes as a stewardship illustration. Let's say we wanted to celebrate the Eucharist with a really nice loaf of bread, and we walked over to Breadsmith and bought a loaf of bread. What does it cost us? $6, $7, something like that? How much are you paying for the stuff in the bread? How much of that $7 goes to the stuff?
30 cents.
How much?
30 cents.
30 cents.
Yeah, very little.
It's a trick question. Zero. What's the stuff of the bread? Sunshine, water, dirt, and carbon dioxide. You can't buy any of that. All right, sunshine is free, rain is free, dirt is free, carbon dioxide is free. What you're paying for is human labor. All of it. Every penny of that $7 is the human economy. The human economy, according to Athanasius, is meant to be gift. So we give that back to God. Now, if the people harvesting our grain and grapes are working at slave wages, well, we need to do something about that, right? We're offering that to God. God's going to bless it anyway, but we need to go out there and make sure that that gift economy is real. So it's our Eucharist that keeps the world in existence, right? It's that offers it back to God. And so in the resurrection and the ascension, according to Athanasius, God then carries human nature back into the divine life, right? The book of Hebrews, the letter to the Hebrews, pictures Jesus in the Holy of Holies, continually making intercession for creation, continually making intercession for humankind, in the presence of God, with his human nature, right? Hebrews says that at the great day of atonement, the high priest enters the Holy of Holies with the blood of a goat. Jesus enters the Holy of Holies with his own blood as offering, and so that he's constantly in the presence of God, making intercession. So the Council of Chalcedon then tries to work out what that means, because people are asking questions, right? This dispute going on between Gnostics and Arians, how is this possible? And so they define it. They don't really work it out. They say, well, it's two natures, unconfused, unmixed in one person, and then leave it for the rest of us to kind of figure out what that means. In the 7th century, Maximus the Confessor, who is my favorite theologian, extends these ideas of Athanasius and says that really what God has intended is that creation itself should be incarnation. That God intends God's self to, in fact, conjoin with creation in the same way that the two natures of God, the two natures of Jesus, of human and God, are conjoined in Jesus. But it doesn't happen immediately, right? Time is part of what is created when God creates. And so that incarnation will take place over time. That the end purpose of God's creation is incarnation. That's where we're headed. And that humanity plays a role in that ongoing process of incarnation. That the church continues the incarnation of the Son in time, right? We talk about us being the body of Christ. Maximus would say that we are, in fact, the ongoing incarnation of God in the world. And as such, the agents for that process of incarnation. Now, you may think that that's, pretty far-fetched, but it is, in fact, biblical. Paul, in his letter to the Romans, in the 8th chapter, says that creation will be completed when we are revealed as the children of God. Let me see if I can find it now. We know all things work together for good for those who love God, who are called according to this purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn within a large family. And those whom he predestined, he also called, and those whom he called, he justified, and those whom he justified, he also glorified. In all these things, we are more than conquerors, for I am convinced. No, I got to back up a little bit. Here it is. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory that is about to be revealed for us. For the creation waits with eager longing for the revealing of the children of God. For creation was subjected to futility, not of its own will, but by the will of the one who subjected it. Who is that? Adam. Adam subjected creation to corruption. In hope that the creation itself would be set free from its bondage to decay and will obtain the freedom of the glory of the children of God. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. And not only creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we were saved, for hope that is seen is not hope, for who hopes for what is seen. So there's Paul already saying that creation will be saved from decay by the revelation of the adoption of us as children of God. So when in modern times, so Gnosticism and Arianism still exist, right? Gnosticism says that the point of Jesus's incarnation is for us to get to heaven. Forget about this world, right? Do you remember James Watt? Anybody remember James Watt? Ronald Reagan's Secretary of the Interior. We were worried about acid rain at the time. James Watt is on record as having said, we don't need to worry about that because Jesus is coming back soon. Use this world how you will. Doesn't matter. Because what's important is escape from this world. That's Gnosticism.
Let's make a lot of money and escape.
What's that?
Let's make a lot of money and escape.
And yes, let's make a lot of money and then escape. Right, there's this wonderful cartoon of, a guy in a business suit sitting with at a campfire with his daughter, saying, yeah, we destroyed the world, but for one bright, beautiful moment there, we made a lot of money. And Arianism still exists in the idea that Jesus was a good moral teacher, right? That what we need to do is follow his moral example. Both of those still exist within Christianity. What Paul is saying, and what Athanasius is saying, and what Maximus is saying is no, salvation is cosmic. That what God's plan is to save this. And we're instrumental in it, that we have a role to play. And that our role is simply to return the created order to God in thanksgiving. Right? So when we put bread and wine on the altar, we're putting free gifts of God, sunshine, water, dirt, and carbon dioxide. Those are free. God gives them, they're gifts. And then we're making a gift in return of the entire human economy. So that the way we live in the world, the way we use the resources of the world, is part of God's plan of salvation. So Heschel says that God created in 6 days, and on the seventh day, hallowed it. I love that he does that. I don't know if you've read that far yet in the book, but he says the first thing in the Bible to be made holy is a day. What Christians believed in the early church is that we were living in the 8th day. That this is the new creation. We're already living proleptically in God's intention for the world. That our Eucharistic gift is what the goal and purpose of the world should look like. That we're living in the new age. So Heschel says, early religion located the holy in space. Judaism located it in time. And we're saying that we locate it in the way we live in the world. We're living in the 8th day already. So the early Christians understood that their Eucharistic worship was redeeming the cosmos. The word cosmos, by the way, means well ordered. It's the same word we get cosmetics from. So the universe is well ordered, put together nicely. And what we're doing is bringing that to its fruition in God. Now, I want to open it for questions. I mean, you're all sitting there kind of, what?
I mean, yes, you talked about the bread and wine on the altar as a gift, but that to me seems pretty measly in comparison to the size of our activity in short life.
Okay, wonderful. Excellent question. So, what Maximus says is that what we do as Christians is contemplation. And when you think of contemplation, you think of people sitting around saying, oh. But what he means is seeing in each created thing its purpose. So the word logos, right? The word became flesh, the logos became flesh. That's from the first chapter of John. The word logos is also where we get our word logic. So the order, the purpose. And what Maximus says is that in every creature, every created thing has its own logos, little l, which participates in the capital L logos. And what we do is to perceive that purpose in each created thing and offer it to God. So those people that you don't like, right? What is God's purpose? I mean, nothing is here by accident, right? Everything that God creates has a purpose, has a logos. What is its purpose? We contemplate that and offer it to God in our Eucharistic offering. So that then defines how we live in the world, right? The way we use things in the world is to forward their purpose, to see their logos and begin to make its connection to the divine logos. And that's what we do. So that when we come to Eucharist, we ought not to be just walking into church on Sunday, according to Maximus. We ought to be bringing with us all of those interactions of the week before and our contemplation of them. And then when we leave the Eucharist, we ought not just to walk out of church, but to say, oh, that means I need to treat this thing differently. Now that I have contemplated its logos and see how it now participates in the divine life, I have to think differently about that. And so, right, that the Eucharist sort of stands at the summit of Christian life, but it's the contemplation of things that we're going to offer, and then the activity, the active contemplation of things as we move away, week by week. That's where we're living in the eighth day.
So what you're saying is that by coming to Eucharist, our vision of how the real true nature of things is reinforced to help us to go out into the world and to continue that process.
Correct. Right. That's what he means by contemplation, is that our vision of the true nature of things, we bring that with us, right? So as you study the scriptures before you come to church or whatever, you think, okay, this is how I see God working in the world. I'm going to offer that. Somebody else has a different understanding and says, this is how look, this is a new vision of God. Now that we've seen this vision of God, we have to go out into the world and live that. Right. So when I said, if our grapes are being harvested by people migrant workers at slave labors, well, we're offering that wine to God. Maybe we ought to be thinking about doing something for those laborers so that offering becomes worthwhile offering. But I need to be thinking about, where's my wine coming from before I get there, and thinking about how am I going to make that reality when I get out there. And with every aspect, Maximus says we're doing that with every aspect of our life. Great question. Other questions?
Not so much a question, but kind of from a perspective, that means we're all incarnation or relational evangelists.
Absolutely. Right. Right, and so how do we live in the world, right?
Yeah,
We live in the world as if everything we encounter is an incarnation of God.
That's simple. It is. I mean,
Yes.
do people see Jesus in me, and do I see Jesus in others?
Right. Mother Teresa, I think it's an apocryphal story, but was interviewed and wanted to know, the interviewer wanted to know how was it that she treated each person that she encountered with such attention. And she said, my religion teaches me that the divine is incarnated in human and incarnated only once. And so this person that I'm standing in front of right now is the incarnation. And Maximus would say that's true of everything. Rocks, galaxies, trees, anything that you encounter is the incarnation that you're standing in front of. Treat it thus.
Which connects us to the Celtic Christians where everything's holy.
Right, right, exactly. And so Heschel says time is holy. And what the early Christians said is we're living in the eighth day, so everything is holy. Right? This is the trajectory of creation. The trajectory of creation is to be taken back into the divine life of self-gift.
So is there something beyond the eighth day, or is the eighth day what we're in continuously?
The already not yet tension is there, right? The preacher last Sunday said, be on the winning side, love has already won. And that's
Bishop?
what,
Yes.
that was what, the bishop said that, right? Bishop Tutu said, love has already won, be on the winning side. Well, yeah, but look around you, right? But that's the inevitable trajectory of creation. No, we're not there yet, but we can live as if we were there. Live as if it were true. That's how we get there. So yeah, Christmas, right? Advent is about anticipating Christmas, and we think of little babies and creches and so on and so forth. But what those early Christians understood was this is cosmic. This changes the nature of the universe, right? That God is active in the universe. Again, very distinct from Greek understanding where God is categorically distant from the world. For the Christians, no, this is the incarnation of God. This is where God is encountered. This is what is holy.
The deists would have liked the Greeks.
The deists read the Greeks. That's why they were deists. Absolutely. Absolutely. They were reading Plato, right? You go back and you look at what university education was at the time.
Yes.
At Oxford and Cambridge and Harvard, they were reading Plato and Aristotle and the Latins, right? They were absolutely Platonists.
I think it's significant to note that Athanasius, in writing this, was not popular.
He
was exiled
5 times. He was exiled 5 times
from
Alexandria by the emperor, right? And so he lived in the desert. You would think that the Pope of Alexandria would be a wealthy guy, but he lived in the desert because he had been exiled 5 times when he was writing against the Arians. When he's writing against the Arians, he's writing against the emperor, right? And the emperor was Arian, and he was saying, no, dude, you're wrong. And so he had to flee from Alexandria 5 times. He was exiled.
And it was this controversy is really what caused Constantine to say, get together and figure out what you believe for the first council
Right, for the
Nicaea that produced.
So Jared was saying before you all arrived that yesterday the Pope and one of the patriarchs and somebody else, I forget who else, said the Nicene Creed together, which is the first time since 1054 that has happened.
The Pope said it without the
Filioque, right? And the reason for not having the Filioque is to maintain what the divine life looks like, right? That it's this divine self-gift, and what distinguishes the persons is the relationship of begetting and processing. And so to confuse that by saying that the Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son sort of technically messes up Athanasius's and then the rest of their understanding of who Christ is and who we are, right? And what distinguishes us from the divine is the relationship of creation. Creation happens in time, begetting and proceeding happen eternally. And that seems all really technical and hair splitting, but to understand how it is that we're saved and what salvation means, those are important distinctions. And what salvation means in the early church is that we are taken into the divine life. God became human in order that humanity might become God. Not in essence, right? Where nobody's saying we're going to become God in essence, but we are going to enter the divine
There's
life,
lots of people who
which
say
is, what's that?
that. There's lots of people who say that,
Right,
that we are divine, we are God.
right. But what they
And they
meant
get away
by,
with all sorts of things.
but that we become part of that offering of self-gift, that grateful offering of self-gift. That's what is the divine life, is self-gifting. And so our goal, our purpose, is to bring the universe back into that life of self-gift. And that goes back to your question. What does that mean when we offer Eucharist? It means we need to see that self-gift in the universe, right? See God giving God's self to us, ourselves giving ourselves to others, to the universe in love and gratitude. And so it's not by accident that the author of the Epistle of John says God is love. That is the divine essence, love. And that's pretty cool.
So it seems to me that the challenge here is to somehow evolve in such a way that our consciousness is continually seeing the universe
Yes.
in this
Yes. Yes.
model or
Yes.
this way.
Right. So Maximus talks about the progression in the holy life, right? And if you read Eastern Orthodox devotional literature, it's very, very different from Western devotional literature. When we are baptized, we are given divine faculties. So if you've ever seen an Orthodox baptism, oh my God, it'll take your breath away. When they chrismate, they put oil on the eyes, the nose, the lips, the ears, and the hands, because God is giving us new eyes to see, new lips to praise, new nose to smell, new ears to hear, and new hands to touch God. And that's what the chrismation, by the way, means making Christ. Christ means the smeared one. That's what Christ means, is smeared with oil. And so chrismating means to make something Christ. So we become Christians, little Christs, with the smearing of that oil. And the Eastern Orthodox devotional literature says that we're given those faculties, but then we have to train them, right? That when you're born, you can't write, you have hands, but you can't write, you got to be trained. And so asceticism, is simply the word that the Greeks used for athletic training. So training those faculties is asceticism. So learning to see the universe as gift is asceticism. And so learning that as we come into the Eucharist, how can I see the world as gift so that I can make my gift to God? And leaving the Eucharist, how do I train my vision to see that God has transformed the world and is transforming the world? And that's our asceticism.
How do you spell that? I'm just trying to.
Ascetism. The Greek word is ascesis. Alpha.
Is it related to what we think of as aesthetics?
No,
Thank you.
different word.
That's where I was going. Okay.
No. Aesthetics is AE, and that's a Latin word. Asceticism is Greek. I mean, when Paul says in Philippians, I train myself to run the race. I, don't want to be boxing at air. He's using that image of athletes training. And in that wonderful hymn where he says, Christ emptied himself, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped. That's how the translation really is. When you ran a race in the Greek Olympics, the winner was the person who grabbed the brass ring. And so he wants, Jesus did not count equality with God as a prize to be won, but emptied himself. And so it's that training, that ongoing training to see Christ in myself, to see Christ in the universe, to see God as incarnate in the universe. That's our ascesis. We've been given those faculties at baptism. We continue to train them in the Eucharist and in prayer. So what Maximus would say that we're doing in our daily prayer is contemplating those interactions that we have, contemplating the universe. Where is God in this? What is God's purpose here? Yeah.
What you've done is reminded me of the instructed Eucharist. I think it's so helpful because it's filled, pointed out little wafer and little mind that doesn't seem to do it.
Right.
But there are so many things that we do in the Eucharist that I don't think, especially if you've been around forever and started as young children, it gets rote.
Right, and it's so, I mean, it is rote, but it forms us as people, right?
If you listen.
Well,
If you do it.
and it sneaks into you, right? You become the kind of people who do this.
Sometimes it takes a long time.
But right, this sort of reappreciation of what we're doing. And if you go back and you read that early Christian literature about the Eucharist, like Ignatius of Antioch, it's powerful stuff. They understood that they were keeping the world in existence, that they were saving the world in their Eucharist, that Jesus was present and active and saving the world through their Eucharist. Not just them, they weren't saving them. Jesus was saving the world through their Eucharist. And that's the piece I think that as moderns we miss. Right, all of those disputes in the Middle Ages and in the Reformation about whether Jesus is really present in the bread and the wine, early Christians wouldn't have understood that at all. They'd have said, of course Jesus is present in the Eucharist, and by Eucharist they meant the whole thing. And he's saving the world in the process of our Eucharist. Bread and wine, whatever. There were early Christian Eucharists, by the way, that were cheese and olives. Perpetua and her companions, when she's martyred and gets to heaven, the Eucharist that she celebrates is cheese and olives. So it didn't matter what the stuff was. And then we also have evidence in the New Testament, don't we, of a bread and fish Eucharist. eating, and thank goodness that one didn't survive.
Anchovy. Still got wafers.
A little cracker with an anchovy on it.
And isn't it this Jewish idea, you do a good thing for another and you save the universe
Mhm.
entire? I mean, I like that.
Yeah, right, and that's very much what these Christians were saying, right? You do a tzaddik, a righteous deed. And the Jewish mythology is that at any given moment, there are 10 tzaddikim in the world, 10 righteous people in the world, who are keeping the world in existence, and you don't know who they are. One could be you, right? And so,
That works.
yeah, right? As long as there are 10, as long as there's a minion of tzaddikim in the world, then the world is okay. And you never know who they are. One of them might be you. So act as if one were you. And that's how we keep the world in existence.
It brings us back to Barb Moraz, who her dismissal, right?
Yeah.
That there are acts to be done that will never be done unless you do them, and words to be spoken that will never be spoken unless you speak them. Go out in the world and share Christ.
And one of the, I mean, the dismissal we do now is our worship here is ended, our service begins. I object to that a little bit. No, our worship is not ended. Go out in the world and worship, right? See God in everything. And then bring that vision back with you next week, right? Worship isn't confined in time and space. And Heschel says it's in time, or no, it's everything. Go worship in the world. Yeah, it's time we can get to church.